How Hollywood failed the men of the 90s. The soul of the mind. The Lavender Haze of the 90s. We all have that one year, that one summer, where the world felt like it was beginning and ending at the same time. For many of us, that year was somewhere in the mid-1990s. It was the era of the unplugged concert, the scent of vanilla perfume, and the soft, grainy texture of a 35mm film frame. But more than anything, it was the era of the sensitive man. For decades, our fathers and grandfathers had grown up with the stoicism of John Wayne, or the hard-edged grit of Clint Eastwood. But the 90s offered us something different. It offered us the Lost Boys. These weren't just actors. They were archetypes of a new kind of masculinity, one that wasn't afraid to look into the camera with eyes that were tired, searching, or even afraid. They were the faces on our bedroom walls, the reasons we stayed until the very last credit rolled in a dark theatre. We felt like we knew them. We felt like if we met them, they would understand us. But as we look back now, 3 decades later, we have to ask, who was looking out for them? This is the story of River Phoenix, Val Kilmer, and Brendan Fraser. It's a story of the high cost of being beautiful, the weight of being brilliant, and the absolute courage it takes to simply survive.
For the alternates is down in the ladies' room.
The Boy Who Felt Too Much, River Phoenix. If you want to understand the 90s, you have to start with River. Think back to that first time you saw Stand By Me. There is a moment where Chris Chambers, played by young River, breaks down in the woods. He isn't crying like a child actor, seeking an Oscar. He is crying like a boy who has already seen the end of the world. Even at 12 years old, River Phoenix possessed an emotional gravity that felt ancient, a weight that shouldn't have belonged to a child. For the women of the 90s, River was our poet laureate. He didn't have the manufactured tan or the bleached white smile of the Hollywood hunks that would follow in the early 2000s. He had that messy, sandy hair and a way of wearing a plain white t-shirt that made him look like a piece of art. But the attraction was deeper than the aesthetic. It was his vulnerability. He was a boy who cared about the planet, the boy who lived in a vegan world before it was a trend, the boy who seemed to feel every tremor of the earth beneath his feet. But there was a weight on River that we couldn't see from the outside. He wasn't just a young actor looking for fame. He was the primary provider for his entire family. This is a crucial detail often lost in the headlines. Having grown up in a controversial and nomadic environment, his parents were members of the Children of God cult. River became the North Star for his parents and 4 siblings from the moment they stepped back onto American soil. By the time he was a teenager, he carried the financial and emotional survival of 7 people on his shoulders. He didn't have a childhood. He had a career that functioned as a lifeline for his loved ones. In My Own Private Idaho, he played Mike Waters, a street kid searching for a mother he would never find. If you watch the famous campfire scene today, you can see the blurring of the lines. He wasn't acting out of a script. He was revealing a piece of his own heart. He once told a reporter, "I don't want to be a movie star. I want to be a human being." But Hollywood is a machine that runs on energy, and River was giving it everything he had. The tragedy of River Phoenix isn't just what happened on the sidewalk in October of 1993. The tragedy was the years of exhaustion leading up to it. He was a young man trying to stay human in a world that only wanted him to be a god. When we lost him, it felt like the 90s lost its conscience. We realized that the very thing we loved about him, his sensitivity, was the very thing that made the industry too heavy for him to carry. The architect of the impossible, Val Kilmer. If River was the soul of the 90s, Val Kilmer was its brilliant, mercurial mind. For many of us, the Val Kilmer era began with a pair of aviators and a smirk in Top Gun. He was Iceman, the cool, precise, perfect pilot But even then, you could see Val was bored with being perfect. He didn't want the easy applause of a blockbuster. He wanted the visceral truth of the craft. Val was a craftsman who approached every role like a holy mission. When he played Jim Morrison in The Doors, he didn't just learn the songs, he learned the frequency of Morrison's soul. He spent a year living in Morrison's leather pants, speaking in his cadence, and studying his poetry. And of course, there was Doc Holliday in Tombstone. For the women watching, Doc was the ultimate 90s heartthrob, a dying man with a silver tongue and piano player's hands. Val played him with a witty, tragic elegance that made dying of consumption look like a poetic choice. I'm Your Huckleberry wasn't just a line, it was a character study in loyalty and impending morality. But because Val was so committed, because he demanded that everything be right, the industry began to whisper. They called him difficult, they called him unworkable, but what they really meant was that he was an artist in a corporate world. The 90s was the decade where the studio became more powerful than the artist. When Val took the role of Batman, he found himself trapped in a rubber suit that made it impossible for him to hear his co-stars, or even move his neck. He wanted to find the psychology of Bruce Wayne, the trauma of the orphan, but the studio wanted him to stand on the mark and sell action figures. When he fought back, the industry punished him. They pushed him to the fringes. But the most human part of Val's story is the recent transformation. After a harrowing battle with throat cancer, Val underwent a tracheotomy that fundamentally changed his ability to speak. The final chapter of Val's story was perhaps his most inspiring. After a long battle with throat cancer, a tracheotomy permanently changed the voice that had brought so many unforgettable characters to life. Yet he refused to disappear. With remarkable courage, he embraced new technology, even allowing AI to recreate his voice for Top Gun Maverick, giving audiences one last emotional reunion with Iceman.
That's why you're still here.
When Val Kilmer passed away in 2025, Hollywood lost far more than a leading man. It lost one of its most fearless performers, an actor who never stopped chasing authenticity, even when the personal and professional cost was enormous. His greatest legacy isn't simply the iconic roles he played, but the uncompromising passion he brought to every one of them. The Heart and the Return. The hero who carried too much. Brendan Fraser. If River was the soul, and Val was the mind, Brendan Fraser was and always will be the heart of the 90s. He arrived on our screens with a wide-eyed, guileless charm that felt like a gift. In an era of grunge and irony, Brendan offered us something different, sincerity. In movies like Encino Man and School Ties, he played the outsider looking in on our world with wonder or pain. For a generation of women, Brendan wasn't the bad boy you were warned about. He was the man you wanted to protect. He had a physicality that was breathtaking. He looked like a Greek statue come to life. But it was kindness in his eyes that made him a superstar. He was the golden boy who actually seemed to like people. Then came The Mummy. In Rick O'Connell, Brendan created the perfect modern hero. He was funny, he was brave, and he had a chemistry with Rachel Weisz that felt like a classic 1940s romance, brought into the modern age. We watched him and we felt safe. We felt like no matter how many ancient curses were unleashed, Brendan would be there with a lopsided grin and a plan to save the day. But while we were watching the hero, the man was breaking. This is the part of the story the cameras didn't catch. Brendan was, yes, a man in an industry that consumes, yes, men, but did his own stunts, over and over again, wanting to give the audience every bit of effort he had. By the time he was filming the third Mummy movie, Tomb of the Dragon Empire, he was literally being held together by ice packs and surgical tape under his costume. The physical toll was immense. He spent nearly 7 years in and out of hospitals for surgeries, including multiple operations on his back. a partial knee replacement, and even work on his vocal cords. He was giving us his health, piece by piece, for the sake of the spectacle. But it wasn't just the physical pain. Brendan also carried the weight of a devastating personal encounter with an industry power player. He has since spoken about a 2003 incident involving the then president of the HFPA that left him feeling silenced, discarded, and deeply depressed. He didn't just stop making movies. He retreated to heal a spirit that had been fundamentally bruised by an industry that took everything and gave back very little. For nearly a decade, the Golden Boy was a ghost, a memory of a sunnier time. But then came The Whale. When Brendan Fraser stood on that stage at the Academy Awards in 2023, his voice trembling and his eyes filled with tears, it wasn't just a comeback for an actor. It was a collective moment of healing for everyone who had ever felt cast aside or less than. We saw the boy we loved in the 90s, now a man who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. He showed us that the greatest act of heroism isn't being invincible. It's finding the courage to let the world see who you really are, scars and all. The silent thread. As we look at these three men, River, Val, and Brendan, we start to see a silent thread that connects them. In the 1990s, we were standing at a crossroads. We were moving away from the grit of the Old West and the stoicism of the 20th century, and moving towards a digital, polished corporate world. These three men were caught in the middle. They were the canaries in the coal mine. River Phoenix showed us that you cannot be pure in a world that wants to sell your purity. He refused to be a product, and the friction burned him out. Val Kilmer showed us that you cannot be intense in a world that wants you to be convenient. He demanded art, and the industry demanded obedience. Brendan Fraser showed us that you cannot give everything to a world that will not catch you when you fall. He gave his body to the machine until he had nothing left to give. But there is a reason we are still talking about them today. It's because they represent our own vulnerability. For the women who grew up with him, these men were our safe harbour. In a world that was often harsh, they gave us permission to feel. They showed us that a man could be strong and soft at the same time. They were the bridge between the famous people of the past, the Bogarts and the Waynes, and the complicated, messy reality of the present. A letter to the 90s. So, as we close the book on this chapter of Hollywood history, I want to ask you a question. Who is your lost boy? Whose poster was on your wall? Whose movie did you watch until the VHS tape wore thin? I suspect that whoever it was, you loved them for the same reason we love River, Val, and Brendan. You loved them because they felt real in a world that was starting to feel very fake. They weren't just stars, they were mirrors. They showed us that fame is a fragile thing, but the human spirit, that is something else entirely. As we move forward, let's carry the lessons of the 90s with us. Let's remember to value the meat of a performance over the gloss of a brand. Let's remember that behind every famous face is a human heart that is just as fragile as our own. Thank you for spending time with me today. Thanks for looking past the action to find the heart. Like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.
Mummy returns.